Mr. Pitts, we may have an open seat if you're inclined. Join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call of supervisors, please. I'm aware that Supervisor Jeff Gentz will not be in attendance. I have not had any communication from Supervisor Haas, Supervisor Johnson, or Supervisor Grulich. Seeing none of them, I trust they are all absent as well. Supervisor Haas and Bruning called the clerk. So either way, we have Supervisor Gray. Did you sign in already? Thank you. 22 in attendance. Let me just make sure that's right. No, that's not right. Who are we missing here? Oh, maybe that is. Okay, 22 in attendance. Citizen comments. Any citizens wishing to address the board, you'll have 5 minutes. Citizen comments are open. Don't be shy. Just okay. Citizen comments. Citizen comments. Citizen comments are closed. First order of business, we're going to have a presentation by Mike Edwin and Rob Schlicht. I should probably let the clerk do that, shouldn't I?
Oh, you can. That's fine.
I'm just excited tonight, I guess.
Presentation by Mike Edwin and Rob Schlicht of WIPFLI on the results of the market analysis, financial feasibility study, and recommendations for Brookside Care Center.
Gentlemen, do we have...
we have no PowerPoint.
We have no PowerPoint.
Yeah, the projector's not working with our system or what have you. So, I hope that we were able to give each of you a paper copy. Does anyone not have that in front of them?
So I'm going to ask you to make sure you speak directly into the mic, please.
So the presentation would have been exactly the same thing as you have in front of you. So there's no difference whatsoever in the information we would have presented versus on the paper copy. So we'll just we'll get moving through the slides. If you lose track of me, please let me know, and I'm just going to try to tell you where we're at in the presentation. I am Mike Edwin. I am a director with Whipley's Healthcare Senior Living Practice. Rob and I have been working with Brookside Care Center for the past 18 months in various capacities, market analysis, financial feasibility studies, and generally just helping with management and you all tonight in planning for the future of Brookside Care Center. So flipping ahead to slide number 3, page number 2, the agenda for tonight. We have, I understand, about an hour and a half with questions. Is that correct? Or less? As quickly as we can get through it, perhaps? Okay, I saw more nods with that. So we're going to move through. We're not going to belabor it, but we want to make sure, you know, since this is one of the only times we had to be in front of you, that you get the benefit of what we've done here. So we're going to cover tonight industry trends that we did review with you in February. And this is going to be a brief review of what we think are the more important industry trends that are driving some of the recommendations that we're going to make at the end of this presentation tonight. I'm going to cover the market study findings, which we did not share with you the last time we were here, which was in February of this year. And we're going to go over the findings of the nursing home analysis as well as assisted living market study. Rob will then cover the financial assessments. We did projections of the current status quo, what would happen with the Brookside Care Center if you did nothing at all other than operate as you are today without significant or other capital investments in the nursing home. Or changes to staffing and/or reimbursement, as well as we did look at the financial projections for a 40-bed expansion of the nursing home. It's not an addition of beds. You would remain at 154 beds, but it's an expansion of the physical plant for the purposes of capitalizing on the Medicare market, therapies, and rehabilitation. So we'll talk that through in more detail as we go forward. And then we also did some financial projections of reusing the old space that would be vacated in the nursing home as a result of adding on to the building for a community-based residential facility, which is assisted living, as well as adding on a few brand new units to the nursing home to get a total of 24 beds. And again, Rob will go through that. And then we do have recommendations, suggested next steps for you to think about as you move forward with this Brookside Care Center's planning. On the next page, slide 4 and page 2, definition of terms. I'm not going to read through these, but I want to make sure you know that they're there. If you do need to refer back to what an acronym I use, such as CBRF or RCAC or SNF, they are on slide 4 on page 2 for your reference. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So the project process, we started this process with Fran and management out at Brookside about 18 months ago, and we did conduct several assessments to provide management with information prior to moving into the market study and moving into the financial assessments. We did go through some education on industry trends, helping all of you as well as management kind of know where are we heading in this industry, what do we think, what do we see going on. We did do a board and management survey. You may remember responding to it. It has been quite some time ago. And we've then moved into the research and the feasibility assessments. I just want to remind you a little bit about Brookside Care Center. It is not very often that we get to work with a county nursing home that is in such good financial shape. Most of the county nursing homes that we have worked with over the last 5 years are either in dire financial straits or are looking forward to a significant tax levy down the road. So it's not very often that we get to talk fairly highly about a county home that we work with in terms of their financial health, as well as the physical plant and the programs and services that you provide. Brookside Care Center is only 15 years old, and I say only in that most county nursing homes are ranging 30 to 50 years old. You rebuilt back in 1995. You did rebuild rebuild 154 beds, which are currently a capacity of 154 beds today. You had the foresight to build private homes. You still do have semi-private bathrooms, which today in today's market we don't do that any longer. We build as many private bathrooms as we can. But certainly you did the right things in building private rooms. You do have a small therapy gym, and you do provide Medicaid and Medicare certified services. You do offer long-term care and short-term care rehabilitation. And recently you implemented electronic medical records to modernize your systems, which again, many nursing homes aren't able to do because of their financial situation, even though they want to, and it certainly helps with your quality of care and being able to capture as much revenue as possible. We do know that based on our research, based on our understanding of your situation in the community, you do set the standard of care of the nursing homes in this Kenosha and in the county. You were recently rated a 5-star facility. The feds have a system of rating. Controversial, yes, some agree with it, some don't, but nevertheless you did rate a 5-star, which means that you are providing, based on the Fed surveys, one of the highest quality of standards that you can as a nursing home. You do tend to be the facility of choice for Medicare and rehabilitation services. You're one of the premier facilities in the region, in Kenosha for sure, for those types of services. And I stressed Medicare several times here because it is the payer source that is the most profitable in the nursing home. And that's the case for whether you're a county, a for-profit, or nonprofit home in the state of Wisconsin. You are not supported by the tax levy. And again, you are one of the only nursing homes, one of 4, that we've worked with, and we've worked with probably 20 in the last few years, that is not on the tax levy. You do potentially have shortfalls here and there, but you're not tax levied as many nursing homes are. Some are tax levied to the tunes of millions of dollars a year. You are a county service to all the Kenosha County residents as well as adjacent communities. And you certainly do maintain a favorable payer mix, which is as a result of building new, back in 1995, 1996, as well as maintaining the building, having private rooms. You're able to maintain a favorable payer mix, which we'll highlight again in a little bit. And just as a kind of a last bullet before I turn it to Rob for a minute, you do have the highest percentage of private pay market share of the nursing homes in this area, and there were, I believe, 9 or 11. I have a slide on that later on. there are a lot of nursing homes around here, and you do capture the most private pay, and you have one of the higher Medicare market shares of 12% of the market. And that's a very good statistic to have as a nursing home today. So, Rob, you want to go through?
Okay, on slide number 8, you see what we did was we did a benchmark comparison of Brookside Care Center to all the other governmental homes in the state of Wisconsin. In essence, what we did for each of the categories that you see there is we ranked them from the highest performing governmental facility to the lowest performing. And an industry benchmark that we like to use is the 75th percentile. If you're operating at the 75th percentile in any of these categories, you're operating at a very good and efficient manner. And you can see how Brookside ranks as far as your Medicare census. As Mike alluded to, you guys do very well with your Medicare program. Brookside has 17.1% of their residents are Medicare payers. That was in 2010. The 75th percentile of all governmental homes was 11.4%. So when I went back and looked, Brookside had the second highest Medicare census of all the governmental homes in the state. And as Mike alluded to, Medicare is really one of the only payer sources where you can make a profit in the nursing home industry right now. For the private pay census, your current census, or the census in 2010, you had 22.2% of your residents on private pay. And you can see the 75th percentile of all the governmental homes is 22.4%. So that's doing very well again. And again, a lot of it is the fact that your new building is very attractive to the market and to the private pay market. People who have their own dollars want to spend it on a facility that looks nice, where they have a private room and so forth. So you've done very well in attracting the private pay market. The Medicaid census, Medicaid is obviously your lowest payer source. You get the lowest rate there, and on average, facilities in the state of Wisconsin lose about $35 a day for every Medicaid person that they take. Brookside averages about 60.7% of their residents on Medicaid, which puts them above the 75th percentile. The lower the Medicaid percentage, the better performing facility you are, at least on a financial basis. So again, you have to balance that against the mission of Brookside, which is to be the county home for the Kenosha County residents as well. And then the last category on that slide is the nursing staffing. On average per patient day, Brookside staffs their nursing staff at 4.33 hours per patient day. The 75th percentile is 4.41, which is, again, above the 75th percentile. So you're in the top 25% of all the governmental homes in the state. Oftentimes we see that per patient day staffing ratio above 5.25, and that's one of the main reasons we see a lot of the governmental homes are losing money. Even with the favorable payer mix of Medicare, Medicare oftentimes uses a lot more staffing, you're still operating above the 75th percentile. So these are a number of the reasons why that Brookside is doing so well financially, and will continue to do so if they maintain these standards. On slide number 9, there's a graph that shows the county levy for Brookside over the since the year 2000. You can see around 2002, 2003, it hit a high of about $3 million of levy. Brookside is projected for 2011 and 2012 to have no levy whatsoever. And again, as Mike said, that's very uncommon in governmental-owned homes here in Wisconsin. And then on the next slide, just a little bit about the economics of Brookside. Nursing homes in general. Nursing homes in Wisconsin accounted for $5.2 billion in economic activity in the state of Wisconsin. Brookside by itself, and this was done by a study by North Star Economics in 2009, Brookside's total direct expenditures were $12.6 million, but that had an economic impact on the Kenosha community of $27.7 million. So we're not talking about a small enterprise here. Total jobs created, and I don't know the details of what time period this was for, but the study indicated that Brookside accounted for 455 jobs in the Kenosha market. And then state tax revenue generated is about $1.5 million.
Okay, before we move on, any questions about Brookside that you would like to address at this time? So we're going to just review, I'm going to just review a few of the industry trends that I talked with you about in February, because there's some things that I want to rehash briefly that are probably the most important drivers as to why you may reinvest in the nursing home, make some changes out there, and look forward to the next 15 to 20 years of operations.
Actually, before you move on, I do have one question. You're comparing in the first 8 or 9 slides, or a good number of them, to other state other county homes in the state, correct?
Yes.
And how many are there total?
Yeah, I was going to say about 30, 35. And it's been shrinking, but
Well, yeah, I know it's been shrinking, and I get emails. I don't know if anyone else in the county board does. I was going to say weekly, but certainly monthly.
yeah,
Looking for the opportunity to sell Brookside
yeah.
or purchase Brookside, depending which way you look at it. So there's 30 to 35 currently, and we're in the top 25%.
Yes.
So top 7 or 8 homes.
Yeah, I would say so. Out of the last 5 years, as I said, I've only worked with a few that are off the levy, financially performing, positively performing nursing
Thank you.
homes. Yep. So page number 6 of your handout, slide number 12 at the bottom. Just a couple of comments on the nursing home trends. Many nursing homes across the state, whether they're county-operated, nonprofit, or for-profit, are certainly looking at repositioning their campus, repositioning their facilities, downsizing their beds if they are running at a low occupancy, which is obviously not a problem for Brookside Care Center, adding assisted living, going to a household model, a neighborhood concept, which is a much more home-like, non-institutional type model, more resident-focused care, changing their dining programs, just changing the whole culture and the way they're caring for seniors in the long-term care industry. The majority of nursing homes are becoming short-term rehabilitation facilities. Years ago, we used to see folks move in with their suitcase and live there for 20 years. Today, we see folks move in with nothing in hand because they don't expect to be there more than 2 or 3 weeks. It has been a very dynamic and changing industry in that regard, going from a very long-term stable population to a high turnover, higher staff, higher costs, and yet reimbursed by Medicare. And you need to focus as a nursing home on those things that you have to change to manage those types of populations, which maybe Brookside wasn't originally developed for. It wasn't built in that manner, even 15 years ago. You're a little further along than those were built 30 or 50 years ago, but certainly there are maybe some things that could be done different with the building and the way it's laid out that would help you in that transition. Certainly, if you want to flip over to the next page on slide 13, we are definitely seeing a shift in the industry from the long-term care setting to assisted living. And that's one of the reasons why we did look at the CBRF option for you and looked at an assisted living market study in general. We did look at the community, and I'll talk that through in a minute. But we're definitely seeing a downshift or a downsizing of nursing home beds and an uptick in the development of assisted living, primarily driven by the demand of seniors. On the slide below there, you can see a little bit of the differences between the traditional and the boomer generations. Today we're serving the traditionals in long-term care, but we're also marketing to the baby boomers, and they have very different expectations of their short-term rehabilitation care, the rehab, or their long-term care for their parents. And although you don't have a lot of folks 65 to 74 at Brookside, you are certainly talking with them as they're deciding where their parents should go. And those are other driving factors, industry trends that we have to look at when you look at the future of Brookside Care Center. In the industry, we are moving toward a continuum of care concept. Standalone nursing homes are at greater financial risk, whether you're doing very well today or not, because you're not diversifying as much your revenue streams. You're not capturing as much of the private pay as you could. Assisted living, independent living, home care services, the whole continuum of care allows long-term care organizations to diversify their risk of being fully funded or in majority funded by federal and state reimbursement programs like Medicare and Medicaid. It is not likely that for Brookside, I'll just say right now, to get into the full continuum of care. You obviously have a lot of options here already in Kenosha, but we did find there is some opportunity for some small expansion to move toward a continuum of care, and maybe it's something you work toward over the years going forward. But this is definitely a driving factor to why you should look at how are we operating today, are there changes that maybe we should make. We want to be honest with you about the governmental funding. We don't want to sugarcoat Medicare and Medicaid. In particular, Medicare. I think all of you are aware of healthcare reform. All of you are aware of the dramatic hole that's in the Medicare program going forward. There already has been some fairly dramatic things done. October 1st of this year, they had cut 12 to 14% of the Medicare rate across the board. Some nursing homes were more or less impacted by that. Those risks are always there. Whether you do something with Brookside Care Center today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now, there is always going to be risk in the Medicare and Medicaid program because it is a federal-funded, tax-supported program. Medicaid trends in county homes on the next slide, page 17. Again, you are doing much better than most county homes in the state. 70% of Wisconsin county homes suffered a net loss in operations in 2010. That'll probably be true in 2011, and that number's been creeping up slowly over the years. In 2008, 73% of the county home resident days were provided to Medicaid residents. As you probably know, many county homes are the provider of last resort. Some are actually in county consortia where they're taking folks absolutely no one else across the state will take. Those facilities tend to lose the most money, but they're also providing the hardest care, the care for the hardest people to care for, and as a safety net. Although Rob said the average loss is 35, 36 for all homes, for county homes specifically last year it was $68 a day on Medicaid. In other words, we really need to focus at Brookside Care Center. If your purpose is and your goal is to stay in the business and continue to own it, you need to minimize the impact of Medicaid because it's a $68 loss for homes across the state per resident day, and you have many, many, many resident days a year. And the last bullet there talks a little bit about that cost shift. Medicare and private pay is cost shifting to the tune of $81 a day, covering the loss of that Medicaid shortfall. Bottom slide on page 9, not a lot of county homes have diversified their services. Most are standalone facilities. There's a couple in your region, and one in West Bend and one in Cedarburg, that have gone more fully into the continuum of care. But only 4 have built assisted living RCAC over the last several years, since 2006. Many more are downsizing if their capacity, if their occupancies are low and they think they're over capacity. Many are looking at converting space to assisted living because they have all the space in the building. A lot of them old buildings, and they're looking at renovations. And the primary reason that most counties have stayed in business is either they're the safety net or they've decided as a county that it's their policy that they're going to have a service available to those who cannot find care, long-term care, elsewhere. And I will say that, to your question earlier, there have been 13 county nursing homes sold in 12 counties over the past 24 years. The most current one that was sold was Jefferson County, Countryside. And probably without a doubt, I would say at each case, the reason they sold was because they had excessive tax levy to the tune of millions of dollars a year. Old buildings, couldn't do much more with it, and their last resort was to sell. With the exception of Manitowoc and Jefferson, turns out they built brand new and then decided that they couldn't support the levy and sold after that. Most of the other times that was not the case. Any question about those trends? Yes?
Let me look. The numbers are small. Last slide on page 9, so that's 18.
Mm-hmm.
I know you said it, but you said it very quickly. Second line there, 4 new RCACs. What's an RCAC?
That is the Residential Care Apartment Complex Assisted Living.
Okay. I maybe give you a little help here in your presentations in the future. Those of us that don't know these phrases, possibly you might want to actually spell those things out. There's been a couple other things that I've been able to pick up on in your presentation, but we don't do this every day, so you may want to explain some of those things to us.
Yeah, if you flip back to slide number 4 on page 2, all those terms are defined there for you. But I will certainly spell those out as I go through it for the rest of the evening.
Right.
Supervisor Rose.
All right, thank you. If Medicaid seems to be declining and Medicare has declined, and it would appear at least if this is going to be a continuing trend based upon what we've read that Medicare is going to be cut this year and probably forthcoming, and those are the proposals on the table. Nobody's talking about increasing Medicare payments for various things, whether it be this type of living, or doctor bills or hospital bills or drug bills. It seems to be the trend is how do we cut that and shift it to some other cost or reduce cost entirely. Why do we want to get involved in something where the revenue source is going down as opposed to going up? Now, if you were talking to a group of pharmaceutical company representatives here, executives there, you'd be talking about what are the trends in biotechnology and that sort of thing, so that you'd say, well, it looks like this is the future and this is where your increased revenues are going to be. Here you're advising us to go into a future where revenues are declining. Why do we want to do that?
Is this a question that you'd like to address now, or is it, does it bear itself out in the rest of your report?
Well, it certainly is in the rest of the report, but quite honestly, I can't answer that question for you. Why you want to stay in the business if you do?
Well, I understand that, but in making this study, and that's the policy question, the question I raise is, where are these revenues going to come from if they are declining revenues? I mean, this year alone, there's been a substantial percentage decrease. The trend is not to increase, the trend is to decrease. So why do we as a county home want to get into something that the revenues seem to be declining?
Supervisor Rose, I'm going to allow them to, well, we can address the question. I don't want to get into the policy debate right now. If you want to address that question specifically and get into the rest of your report, we can do that.
Sure. First off, on the Medicare program, you guys make a profit currently on the Medicare program. When I ran the models that you'll see later, every additional Medicare person that you brings in about $80 per day of profit. That might, of course, decline if there's percentage cuts over the future, but it's still a profit as opposed to the loss that you achieve on a Medicaid resident. And the Medicare cuts that took place October 1st are an exception rather than the norm. They were a correction because the October 1st, 2010 rates were grossly overpaid. The federal government expected to be budget neutral, and they ended up giving everybody 15 to 20% rate increases, and they made a correction on October 1st of 2011 to correct that. In a normal year, it's been about a 1 or 1.5% increase in Medicare. We have no crystal ball that says that 1.5% is going to continue by year, but we really believe that the 11.7% or 12%, whatever Brookside impact was a correction for the 2010 rates.
Well, but it's a permanent correction, though, isn't it?
It is.
It is permanent. So again, we're going into a declining rate structure. Are you going to predict that the rates are going to be the same or go up?
If you continue to make a profit like you are currently on Medicare at $80 a day, that's after the October 1st rate cuts were in effect.
Oh, I understand the profit right now,
Sure.
But in terms of looking forward, do you want to get into something where the profit structure is going down? I guess that's the debate.
All right, thank you. Continue, please.
That's the guts of it.
We'll have that policy debate when the time is right. Go ahead.
Okay, so flipping over to page 11 and starting on slide 21, I'm going to talk through the findings of the market study that we did. We did look at quite a bit of data that's not fully shown in this presentation, obviously. There is a full report that was submitted to Fran and to Jim, and that certainly can be made available to you. It has all the supporting documentation and data and analysis, as well as the financials. There's a lot of supporting data in the financials that is not shown here that Rob has made available to Fran and to Jim as well, that you could probably access if you have very specific questions on it. So in summary, we did a market study, and on slide number 21, just real brief, this is the way we've defined your market area based upon the patterns of Brookside Care Center, the admission patterns. Fran and her staff have done a very good job of really capturing a lot of market area in terms of getting referrals from hospitals around the area, attracting people from their home, from not only Kenosha County, but as far away as Burlington and up toward a little bit of southern Racine County and so forth. You can see that. The difference between the green and the orange, the green is what we call a primary market area, and the orange is what we call a secondary market area. You don't need to really belabor that. It's just that we look first at your backyard. What do we think is achievable in the green? What's going on in the green area? Because that's really the closest to you. And then what is going on in the orange area or the secondary market area. Slide number 22 is a slide that shows you your population trends. The blue line is your aggregated, already aggregated, don't add all the lines together, 85 and over population for the county. The yellow line is the 75 and over, the black line is the 65 and older, and then the red line is the 55 and older. And you can see there is generally an upward trend in the elderly populations in your county. I show this to you because not every county has generally an upward trend in their elderly. Kenosha County is not experiencing the big dips in their senior populations that other counties just north of you in Milwaukee County and some other smaller counties in the state are experiencing today. So it does bode well for staying in the long-term care business. There will definitely be a need for long-term care services as well as rehabilitation, short-term stay services as the 65 and 75 and over population increase over the next 10 and 20 years. The difference between that graph and this next graph is really it's showing you the 5-year increments for the market area in total. So it's not just the county, it's that little bit bigger geographic area. And it's just statistics for you so you can look at it. The left side of this graph is the primary market area. The middle part of the graph is the secondary market area. And the far right side is that total, that green and orange area combined. And I circled the areas of the most concern, if you will. For the nursing home, we start serving folks mainly at 65. So that's where the green bars come into play. And you can see that there is rather significant growth in those populations just over the next 5 years. Actually, it's 4 years now because this is already a year out of date. The 75 and over population is a little flat, and then your 85 and over population is just starting to grow. And we're going to see these trends continue upward over the next 20 years at least. It's going to be a long time before we start talking about not having enough seniors around. So that's really what those graphs are there for you. The slide on 24 is just basically a summary of what I just said, so I'm not going to belabor that one. We did do, as part of this market study, not only a look at demographics, where do we see your elderly populations trending in this county and in your area. We did look at who's in the market today doing exactly the same thing or similar things to Brookside. As I said before, there are 9 nursing homes in the county and in the market area. Some are for profit and some are nonprofit. You're the only governmental nursing home as far as I know. We excluded the Veterans Center. That wasn't part of this study. There are a little over 1,000, almost 1,100 skilled nursing beds in this area, and I can say that you are faring better than some and as well as others. There are a few nursing homes in this area that have very low occupancy or lower occupancy and are not able to fill their beds. And there are facilities like yours and several others that were doing better. And of the nursing homes in the area, your occupancy trends the highest historically. We would look back all the way to 2002. And that's mainly due to the private rooms that you've built back in the 90s. Your reputation, the physical plant is a big part of it, your location. The fact that you're a nonprofit and you're county operated also helps you in that regard as well. At 98% occupancy, I can tell you is 10 to 12% over the statewide average. We're seeing averages in the 88, 87 range today. So you're doing very well. At the time of the assessment, there was only 34 open beds in this entire area. And that actually is a positive sign that the beds are needed. And then later on, we're going to talk a little bit about a bed need analysis too. Moving into the next slide, slide 26, you see the occupancy data that I suggested there. You're doing well. There's 1, 2, 3 of you that are over 90, and a couple of you that are in the 80s, high 80s. And then you can see there are a few others that are struggling a little bit to fill their beds, 76% full, 75% full. Brookside's paramix on the next page, slide 27, is favorable, as I said, and Rob pointed out. Just orientate you to this table a little bit. Brookside Care Center at the top. MA is Medicaid. MC is Medicare. PP is private pay. Okay? Your 3 main payer sources in a nursing home. Medicaid obviously is the one that we're losing up to $68 or more a day on. Medicare we're making some money on, and private pay generally, because of the loss in Medicaid, is a break-even endeavor. And you can see that around 28% of your payer days are private pay, and that's the best, second best against St. Joseph's Home for the Aged in your area. And your Medicare percentage is 13%, which is quite good. And this is 2010, but I understand you're maybe trending even a little better for 2011. You know, if we talk around 5% for county homes, that's generally pretty good. County homes typically don't have a lot of success in capturing Medicare because of their physical plant, their old buildings, they're not set up for the therapy, et cetera. All the reasons we've already talked about. And you can see there's quite a few nursing homes in this area that are doing well, and others that are kind of down in that 10, 8% range for Medicare. On the next slide, slide number 28, again, we talk about the Medicare private pay market share. The table on the left is your Medicare market share. Table on the right is private pay. Market share meaning you have something like 110,000 Medicare days, I can't remember the exact number, in this area, and you're capturing 12% of that as of 2009. Okay? Same with the private pay. So you're doing pretty well there. Any questions on any of that data before I move into the two conclusions of the market study? We did look at the need for the nursing home. Many county nursing homes and our for-profit nonprofits as well are asking, do we need all of our beds? You know, do we look forward 10 years and say, are we going to be able to remain 98% full? How do we do that? How can we do that if we're if we keep all our beds, everyone else does too? You know, what's the need going to be? So we did run an analysis of nursing home bed need. It's based off of actual utilization rates by age. It's a fairly good way of assessing needs of nursing home beds. We did take a conservative approach in that in the state, it's declining 6% a year. There is a 6% a year decline in utilization of nursing homes across the state on average. Some communities have an increase, others have a dramatic decrease. So it is an average of about 5.6% decline. And you can see in this graph here that the projected bed need was for 2011, 1,130 beds. You have 1,127. So there's a bed shortage of 3 beds. Now, in any area, beds will be up, beds will be down. As I said earlier, you had 34 open beds, okay? And that's consistent with nursing homes. You're always going to have a few open beds. But statistically, based on utilization rates, you're right at where you should be in an area. You shouldn't necessarily have more beds or fewer beds. What that tells us is that Brookside Care Center really should keep all 154 beds. And if you look out, even with a small utilization decline, with the population growth, we feel there is going to be a need for even more beds in this area. A lot of that gap that you see there, that negative 46 and negative 36, will be captured through assisted living. You know, not everybody will land in a skilled nursing facility that needs some sort of rehabilitation or long-term care. So, nevertheless, point being, you're not in a situation where we feel that your occupancy will just wither away slowly. We feel there will be a continued high demand for nursing home beds in this area. On the assisted living, on the next slide, next couple slides, there are plenty of assisted livings in your area. You have 10 CBRFs and 2 RCACs. CBRF is community-based residential facility. Typically, a CBRF is for folks that are higher acuity, need more care, and or memory care, have cognitive-related problems. The residential care apartment complex is what it says. It's an apartment. It's an assisted living, licensed, and it's usually for folks that are more independent, have less frailties, can get by on less care. And you have a couple of options of both. If you did decide to develop a continuum of care, move into assisted living, you're obviously moving into a fairly intensely competitive market. You just had one open not too long ago while the study was going on. As a matter of fact, they opened their doors. You would definitely need to attract from a much greater area than just Kenosha. There are a lot of facilities in this city. And if you did get into assisted living of any size, you know, beyond a real small one, you would have to really capture a lot of folks from outside of Kenosha, the broader geographic area. Nevertheless, the market, if you want to flip to the next page, the market demand analysis, considering there is already competition, there may be something in the pipeline, suggested based on the population trends and based on what we know about utilization for assisted living, there is some potential for up to 40 apartments, 40 residential care apartment complex, and 32 CBRF, community-based residential facility. Whether you build it or a private developer or one of the existing long-term care operators in town decides to do that over the next 5 years. There is some opportunity if you did want to move into that. The hardest hit segment in long-term care today is senior independent living. And we've been advising most of our clients to stay away from developing apartments for seniors right now. So that's that last bullet on slide 31. We really don't think, if you're going to get into a continuum of care, if you're going to look at an alternative service to offer to the county residents, independent living isn't the way to go. Stick with what you know, which is care. You provide high care at the skilled nursing, and you can do the same sorts of care in the assisted living if you would do that. The other nice thing about the CBRF licensure is that it allows you to utilize the space in the nursing home. If you did move forward with a rehab therapy expansion, if you're going to vacate a wing, you can convert that to assisted living. It is allowable under code. So that's one thing to think about as you look at CBRF. So back in June, after we had this market study done, we did present these findings to management, talk with Jim, and we did decide at that time, we had direction from Fran and from the group, to evaluate further on slide 32, rebuilding a wing of the skilled nursing facility for purposes of capturing Medicare market share and enhancing the rest of the building to capture more private pay. Evaluate rebuilding the therapy gym and outpatient rehab areas for purposes of capturing Medicare market share. I can tell you that for the amount of Medicare you're doing today, without having any other changes done, you do need a new therapy gym. That is something that I would put at the top of the list. It is too small. It's not adequate. You're losing opportunity just because of that therapy gym. I did tour it one day when it was busy, and I couldn't believe they could get work done in there the way they do. They're doing a fantastic job with what they have, but that alone, of enhancing that gym where they actually do the therapy, where they go in and they have the tables set up and the mock kitchens, the mock bathrooms, etc., that alone is inadequate just for what you're doing today at 32 Medicare on average. And finally, evaluate further renovating a wing in the SNF for 24-bed CBRF. SNF meaning skilled nursing facility, the nursing home. For persons with memory loss, Alzheimer's, and other frailties. You know, there is assisted living here. One of the areas that is often overlooked and developers and others don't get into is a high care behavioral type assisted living. And that's kind of what Fran and her group were talking about doing. Something a little different than what's being done in the market today to provide a level of service for folks that maybe can't find assisted living because their behaviors are a little bit beyond what most want to care for. And that's very well suited for the environment you would be creating at Brookside Care Center. Finally, before I turn it over to Rob, who's going to talk about the financials and some of the other motivators for this, obviously there are an inherent risk for Brookside Care Center. Whether you do anything at all, whether you stick with the status quo and remain in business, or whether you move forward and go through with a project of any type. The uncertainty of Medicare and Medicaid, you cannot overlook. You do have to have a discussion about that. We do not know for sure whether there will be 14% cuts 5 years in a row, 10 years in a row. We don't know that. What we are told is that it is a correction. It is not going to happen next year. Next year, they are talking about a 2% cut, but they're also talking about a basket adjustment, which will end up being a 1% increase. And that's typical. That's the typical Medicare program. Medicaid is a state program. It depends a little bit on who's in office. It depends on the budget. We don't know those things. And nursing homes have been hammered. They really have. I've been in this business about 11, 12 years. There hasn't been a year where they've come out really good in Medicaid. One year, I think they got 5%. 1 year. All the other times, it's 1 or 2% increases. Don't overlook the shifting preferences of seniors. Brookside Care Center is desirable today. It will not be 10 years from now because somebody else will come in, one of the nursing homes will do exactly what we're talking about, and all of this nice market share you've got and you're the premier facility will start to fade away, and you will slowly wither on the vine. Shifting preferences of seniors as the boomers become a bigger percentage of your customer is something you have to pay attention to. The competitive market pressures, I can't stress that. They are there. You have 1,000 nursing home beds in this area, 1,100. You have plenty of other assisted living providers. That's a real issue. You're going to have to pay attention to that if you stay in business. It's also a threat because other facilities can do exactly the same thing you are, and it can change the dynamic here in this area. The economic and housing market slump does continue, makes assisted living harder and harder and harder to fill and keep full. and harder for people to afford the rates that you're charging. Definitely a risky time to be getting into assisted living that requires extensive capital to get it done. Obviously, there's always going to be legislative and regulatory pressures, and financing is not favorable still toward long-term care, save for GO bonds. It's about the only place that is really cheap money, that's easy money for you to get. Everywhere else, revenue bonds, other types of financing is extremely difficult to get, and they look at health, long-term care in the same bucket as health care, and because of reform, it is scaring a lot of financial institutions. Finally, I will say, as we go into the finances, based on the market study, what we're seeing and what we know in the not only your area, but across the state and other places we look, we definitely think that investing in your facility will mitigate a lot of these risks. If you think about it, where would you be today if you stayed in business in 1995 and didn't do what you did then?
Supervisor Arrington, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm listening to when we got to the market study conclusions and we spoke about rebuilding the therapy gym and the outpatient rehabilitation areas. How would we begin to get some information about how much that would cost to do? I think that would be something that we may want to take a look at as a board. I mean, this would definitely make our nursing home more attractive, and people like things that are new, and it will probably also open the door for different other people to want to come in and perform therapy and rehabilitation in our facility. So, I mean, is there a figure out there to tell us how much it would cost?
In this process, we have costs from a company called AG, and it was the gentleman that actually built your home in '95. But the costs are for the whole project.
Okay.
It's the living units and the therapy gym combined. I don't know if you know the breakout. We didn't look just at the therapy in this phase. We looked at the whole thing together.
Okay.
But we could get to that number fairly easily.
Okay, yeah, I would like to just
Yep.
see the number as we begin to brainstorm on this. Thank you.
And there'll be an awful lot of work to do to get to that point, and certainly putting together numbers for concepts, large-scale, small-scale pieces, phased approaches is all something that the county has done on many, many multi-million-dollar projects before, so I trust we'll be able to do that relatively simply here once we understand if, in fact, there's going to be any type of plan going forward. Continue.
Okay, on slide 35, I'm going to start to talk about the different financial assessments that we did. Mike alluded to them before. Basically, we did two assessments. The first one we did was what's called a status quo assessment to show what Brookside will be, how they'll perform going forward with no major operational or physical changes to the facility if they continue to operate as they are today. And then the second model that we did was to say we're going to construct a 40-bed therapy addition on the site of the old building that was tore down, and also renovate one wing of the existing nursing home to 10 assisted living beds, and then build an addition onto the back of the building that would add an additional 14 assisted living beds, giving you a total of 24 assisted living beds. For modeling purposes, and don't get too caught up in the dates here, but we assume that the therapy addition would open on January 1st of 2013, and the renovated assisted living piece would open 6 months later. We got those time frames from an architect that gave us some cost estimates of the whole project. Don't get hung up on the exact start date. Obviously, there's a lot of process that would have to be gone through if you do decide to go down this route. On slide 36, a little bit more about the status quo model. Again, it's designed to show the impact of making no changes, operating as you are currently today, no capital spending, and that's always a big qualifier because we never know in the building when something major is going to go wrong with one of the systems, a roof, and so forth. When we build these models, we use historical financial results as a basis, and we use the December 2010 financial results to build upon. And then we factor in some of the knowns, some of the things that we know are going to come up in the industry and some of the things that are happening currently in your building, and you see those at the bottom of slide 36. We know that in 2013, employees are going to be contributing 5.8% of their pension or salary to their pension, so that was factored in. On October 1st, we've talked already about the Medicare rate cuts. That rate cut is factored in. And then, as Mike alluded to in the Medicaid program, money is very scarce in Madison. We already know that there's no Medicaid rate increases for nursing homes until July 1st, 2013 at the earliest. And again, that's even going forward from there is in question depending upon the state finances. So on page 37, you see the results of the status quo. Again, if everything remains the same, 2012, Brookside is projected to have very little or no levy. As you see there, a small operating profit. 2013, it would improve slightly. And in 2014, you'd see a large increase in the bottom line for Brookside because at that point, the debt that's currently on the books would disappear. The debt that you have in place when you built the building back in 1995 would come off the books. So that would have a significant, as you can see, bottom line impact to cash flow and to the profitability. And then that would continue through 2015 and 16. You see the numbers go down slightly every year, and that's just reflecting the fact that the cost of operating generally goes up a little bit more than the actual rates that you get and the rate increases that you get from your governmental programs. So costs generally outpace your revenues. On slide 38, then, we start talking about the second model that we built here. This is the 40-bed addition of the rehab unit and the addition of the assisted living beds, the 24 units. Again, it factors in the pension contributions. It factors in the Medicare rate adjustment on October 1st. It factors in the no Medicaid rate increases. We assumed occupancy would drop a little bit because the Medicare, the rehab unit would not be full at all times just by the nature of a Medicare resident. Those folks are turned over frequently as you rehab them and send them home. So oftentimes when we see something like this, we see a small downturn in occupancy, but nothing significant, just because you're turning those folks over until you get another admission to replace them. For the payer mix, we assumed that the payer mix would go up slightly from an average of about 28 Medicare residents to 35. Again, this is something we see whenever a new building like this is opened up. Again, it generates excitement in the community. It's offering them a new type of services that maybe they haven't seen before. It's a really new focus on rehab, and that tends to bring in more of those Medicare folks, especially as you sell that new unit to your hospitals and the discharge planners. They're going to be sending more of those Medicare folks over your way by nature of the type of building and services you're going to be providing there. And then we assume that because your census is somewhat fixed, you'd see a small decrease in the Medicaid population accordingly. With the therapy addition, because you'd be taking additional Medicare folks, there are additional staffing concerns that you would need to address. We assume that you'd be adding 5 FTE positions that you see on the top of slide 39 there, 3 RNs and 2 nurse aides to account for, again, the additional acuity of those folks that you don't have right now. And then ancillary expenses, the therapies that they incur, the drugs, x-rays and lab and so forth would also increase. The project cost for the therapy center addition, we got this quote again from AG Architects. Again, this was done without any drawings or any schematics or anything. It was basically a rough estimate of cost based on the number of units and what you're trying to accomplish here. Their estimated cost was $5,625,000 to build that 40-bed building on the old site. And they call that an all-in cost. That's including of all the furniture and equipment and all of the other legal costs and so forth to construct that building. When we did the financial model, we assumed that the project would be fully financed, that it would be financed on a 20-year basis at 4.5%, again using those general obligation bonds that Mike alluded to, which right now for counties is probably the most likely form of financing that's available to you. And again, the original debt that you have on the existing building comes off the books in 2013 in our model. Again, we assume that the new building would open 2013, so in that first year, you're almost going to have, if that goes by those dates, you would have double debt on your books for just that 1 year until the existing debt comes off those books. On slide 40, a little bit more about the CBRF portion of the model. We assume that the occupancy of the 24 units for the assisted living would be 92% or 22 residents. And we assume that it would take about 8 months to fill up those additional beds with assisted living residents. Some of those folks might come out of your nursing home right now. Some you're going to get from the community, but we assume that it would take about 8 months to fill up the facility. We assume that the assisted living would be 100% private pay, which oftentimes is the case for a new building. And then the market rate that you would charge in that building was approximately $3,200 per month, which In Mike's market study, he did a survey of what other assisted livings in the area are charging, and that $3,200 falls in line and is extremely reasonable, especially for a brand new building. We assume that that rate wouldn't increase for the first 18 months. That's typical in a new building. A lot of times that's what you use to attract new residents, is to bring them in and say your rate is frozen for a certain period of time, and then after 18 months the rate goes up every year after that. The addition of the assisted living would also add additional jobs to the facility, because again you're going to be caring for 22 more people than you are now, and you'd add 7 personal care aides, similar to what a CNA or certified nursing assistant is in the nursing home, 1 activity person, 1 housekeeper, 1.5 dietary, and 1 additional administrator or bookkeeping position. So it's a total of about 11 additional positions in the CBRF for the assisted living. The project cost of constructing that addition for the assisted living and renovating 1 wing of the existing nursing home to add those 24 units was estimated by the architects at about $1,832,000. Again, that's without any drawings and schematics. That cost can go up or down based on the finishes that you use, the type of building that you construct, and so forth. And again, we assume, much like the nursing home piece, the addition, that the whole project will be fully financed. If you flip to page 41, you see the results of the model with the nursing home addition and the assisted living. You see that in 2013, again, Brookside as itself is basically a no-levy operation. 2013, the new facility would lose $546,000. Again, that's only due to the fact that you'd have existing debt from the old building plus the new debt on the new construction. In 2014, that would be the first year that the existing debt would disappear, and you see that it returns the facility to a small profit. Each additional, I ran some numbers through the model, and I said if we increase the Medicare census by 1 at any given point, profitability increased by about $80,000 per Medicare resident. Again, the difference there is a Medicare resident is reimbursed close to $500 a day. A Medicaid resident is reimbursed approximately $146 a day. So there's a significant difference in the revenue per day on a Medicare resident. And the last point there, again, the new building would likely not only help Brookside remain the premier Medicare provider, but you'd also be serving a whole new population in the assisted living that you're not currently serving today. On slide 42, it's a side-by-side comparison of the status quo and the second model. You can see, obviously, the status quo, it's intriguing the way it turned out, because the way that, if you look at this, it says that doing nothing is actually more beneficial to the facility. And that is the case because the debt comes off the books in 2014. However, in the new project, again, you'll be setting yourself up for the long term of the facility. You'll be serving additional people. You'll be adding additional staff to the facility and workers in the county. So there are other benefits to doing the project that aren't in the status quo if you continue to go on as you are now. Any questions?
Does not appear there are any questions. It appears there is a question. Supervisor Kohlmeyer.
Do you guys have longer term projections, like 15 years, 20 years? Because the way that it looks, like you said, if we do nothing, you're in a better financial position. To really see the benefit, I think I'd like to see like 10 years, 20, see what that looks like down the road.
Yeah, when we do projections, it's hard to get further out than 5 years just because the governmental programs are so volatile. What we've projected in here is what we anticipate and what we're hearing for the next few years. But if you get beyond that, there'll be a whole nother administration potentially in Madison and in Washington that could have a whole different outlook on long-term care. So we could project it out further, but whether the numbers are meaningful or not, it's not always the case.
Anything else? Mr. Kohlmeyer?
Oh, no.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, so I have two more slides here I'm going to cover, and then we can take general questions if you want or what have you. You are projected to have significant cash flow, and I use that word not lightly because we don't very often see a nursing home, a county nursing home, with a $700,000 plus cash flow projected on their books. It just doesn't happen very often. That is something you need to think about. Do you want to potentially let that cash flow happen for a few years before you look at a project like this, before you look at investing. You do need to balance between the short-term gain of the next few years and your long-term potential loss of not maintaining your market position at Brookside Care Center. In other words, is now really the right time for you? That's your decision. I can't make that decision for you, but that's why we put those two numbers right next to each other on that slide. We don't want to try to hide anything from you to say, we think the project is the right way for you to go, the only way you should go. Dollars and cents wise, it makes some sense to let things ride for a while after the debt's paid off. But you have to balance that with the long-term strategy. What is your intention? What is your intention with Brookside Care Center? Is it to remain in the business for the next 15 to 20 years? Is it to remain in business long enough to sell and get out? Is it your intention to continue to provide the service for the county or the residents and be the best provider of those services that you can be? So that's the piece that I think you need to balance and think about after we leave here today. We do believe that investing in your facilities now or in the next 3 or 4 years does increase your probability of having a successful 15 to 20 years like you have for the last. If you don't invest, we think that you're going to have a harder way of it. And that's proven by all the other county homes save for a handful in the state. On the last slide there, if you buy into that, if you can get past some of the risk side of this, we do believe to remain the premier facility, and I don't use that word lightly either, because that's what you are today, for the next decade and beyond. Then proceed with further evaluations. I'm not saying build it tomorrow. Proceed with further evaluations of the 40-bed project. And I said it before, at the very least, they need a new gym out there to just maintain what they have today and try to increase 1 or 2 or 3 more Medicare census over the next 6 months, year, or 2 years. That gym is very important. It's inadequate today. So at the very least, further evaluations of what it would take to get that done, even without the additional living units. And keep in mind, the reason that, we probably didn't say this, and I should have at the beginning, the reason we would even suggest rebuilding living units is because you need private bathrooms. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to make private bathrooms in the old building. It's going to cost you a lot of money to do that, most likely. So having a new suite with all private rooms, private bathrooms set up for this market is like the optimal way to go, okay? And that's what we're talking about here today. Proceed with further evaluations. Again, evaluate further the CBRF, assisted living, conversion or addition. If that's not desired, if you say, you know what, that's just too much, that's too much competition, it's too risky, then evaluate the other changes to make the 40-bed happen. So she's going to vacate units within the nursing home, and there's a lot of things that you can do within the older building to make it much more home-like, the neighborhood concepts, the household concepts, social model of long-term care, just by adding the long-term care or the rehab care component and not doing the assisted living. So that's what that second sub-bullet is about. Obviously, there's going to be changes to operations and staff as through this process. You need to keep talking about that and getting reports from management. And then finally, if you buy into any of this at all, you will need those costs and button down what exactly you want to do. And so additional architectural analysis would be necessary. Because the only thing the architect did for us is give us industry numbers. They didn't do anything per se, other than I guess they did look at your plans because the gentleman did build your home. So he had a good idea of what was possible, but they're rough numbers and those need to be buttoned up. And obviously in the meantime, we think that obviously you're doing a good job, management's doing an excellent job, and they need to maintain that because it can very quickly turn the other way.
Additional questions? Seeing none. Supervisor Noble.
Well, in your presentation, which was in February, you had something about workforce trends, and at the bottom you said by 2030 there will be a shortage of 35 million workers. How that sounds like a train wreck. How is that gap in workers going to be narrowed? I mean, if you can have the facility, if you don't have the workers, what good would it do to have a great facility?
I'm sorry, but I don't have an answer for that one.
And you know, our workforce development, we have something called workforce development, and they don't have an answer either. So somebody's got to come up with that answer. I mean, we need jobs in this country, and here seems like a great place to do it, but we're missing the infrastructure to get those people, fill that gap.
Supervisor O'Day.
Is your contract completed then, or will there be ongoing updates in any respect whatsoever?
You know, I hadn't thought about that question before I walked in here today. We're pretty flexible. So I believe we've completed the contract, but we're pretty flexible.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? If not, I will, first of all, thank you, gentlemen, for the report. I find it interesting, comprehensive, and certainly an effort that I think was necessary. I applaud administration, both county administration as well as Brookside administration, for taking the initiative to look at the issue. You've got, which I'll touch on in a moment, a report on your desk on the golf courses, and Brookside is no different. You know, we've been in the new facility now for 15 years. The market is changing. The market is getting much more competitive. The needs continue and the requirements continue to change, and it is our responsibility through our administration to continue to look at ways to improve. Continuous improvement is something that we have to be conscious of, be aware of, and be willing to undertake regularly. My concern, it's not a concern. I want to recognize a couple of things. First of all, I support understanding long-term where Brookside is headed and what we should be doing with the facility. I won't tell you today it should be status quo, it should be an addition. I'm not convinced that it needs to be any one of the proposals or concepts that we've seen today. Maybe it's something different, and that's what part of the discussion will need to continue to be. Certainly what I don't want to do is move forward. I don't want to get to, I don't want the analysis to continue as so many other projects in Kenosha County have. I'm not talking recently necessarily, I'm talking historically, and that is the way we analyze what to do next with a facility or where we should head with a concept is, and I promote getting architects involved whenever possible, but is that we engage an architect and we run down the road of building plans and concepts, and at some point in time we realize we spent a boatload of money and it's not in fact the direction or the will of the county board, the administration, or whatever else. So I want to proceed cautiously. I want to proceed economically, and that means we're not spending significant sums of money with architects and or engineers trying to understand if a concept is going to work. There are other ways to evaluate that. This is a good start. It's a good product, and we continue with that discussion and continue in that vein. At the end of the day, I think we need to make a decision on as we have said with so many other facilities we have, do we stay in the business or do we not? If we do, what do we have to do to get ourselves in position for the next 15, 20 plus years? And I hope Fran and your team, the administration, will continue to have those discussions, and we'll come forward with a plan of attack going forward. So again, I appreciate it. I see we've got a couple of other lights. I trust these are questions. Supervisor Gable.
I didn't touch a light.
Or not. Supervisor Rose.
This is not a question, just a comment to follow up on what I agree with what you said, is that we need to first have the policy debate, where do we want to go, and then if we determine we want to expand in some fashion, then spend the money on architects. But the first thing that comes, and I think the presentation is good, it's informative, the next step is the policy debate. Which direction, if any, do we want to head? And that's what I got into when I made the questions and comments, but I think at some point that ought to be the agenda for the evening.
I couldn't agree more. I'm also not convinced that we have all the information we need to make that final policy decision. I think there's more work to be done, not necessarily with a paid consultant, but maybe. Clearly, there has to be some direction. We bring, the argument is we bring top quality administrators to Kenosha County for our facilities and our departments. So it is my belief we have that at Brookside. And we're at, as with the golf course, et cetera. If that's our premise, then I'm looking for that information to come forward so we can make that policy decision. Supervisor Clark.
I just wanted to share an observation. When we go over our budget next week and we talk about some of the debt, you're going to find out that we are pressing up on our county board debt policy limit. And when you consider these projects and trying to fit them in, or you consider that we have to spend maybe millions of dollars on the joint services software project that's going to be coming down the road, our credit card, based on our policy and our debt limit, is maxed out. So as we make decisions on next year, on this budget for this upcoming year that we're going to be debating next week, and we take a look at that, you have to consider all these things in that long-term debt plan and figure out where this fits, because we have a policy in place. We've set that limit on that card, and it's going to be a matter of, if you're going to try to do these things, you're going to be more comfortable with raising our own debt policy. So something to consider.
Appreciate that, Supervisor Clark. A point I had intended to make, in addition to that, you know, we've got a change in the county board coming. We will have a significant, whether we do nothing, or whether anyone who runs again is reelected or not, but we have an automatic reduction of 5. We have a couple who have announced they're not running again. This will be a very different board in April of 2012. So that's why I make the point that I don't want to get too far down the road. We have to continue to do our work, and we have to be prepared middle of next year to lay this issue out to the new board that will be seated here. I'm sure many of us will be back. Any way you cut it, we're going to have a significant changeover in the makeup of this county board, and we have to be prepared to talk about that. And certainly the point about our bonding capacity is one that we've got. Golf courses are going to be the same way. In the next couple of years, we're going to see that debt come off of the books, so to speak. And, you know, just because we paid off the car doesn't mean we got to trade it in and buy a new one. Or just because we paid off the house doesn't mean we got to put the big addition onto it. I want to make sure we proceed cautiously and proceed appropriately. With that, gentlemen, again, I thank you. Not too bad time-wise. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Clerk? No. Chairman comments, announcements of the chairman. I have a few. I mentioned on your desk is the golf report that I referenced last time, last county board meeting. The 5 members who were at the presentation did not get another copy. However, everyone else did. This presentation from Velocity Consulting, which is the consortium from Carthage College, will be with us at the November 15th meeting to make a similar presentation that we had tonight, only on the golf courses. So I would ask that you spend some time. A great deal of information here, a great deal of good information. Take a look at it. Be prepared to be a part of the presentation. Ask some questions if you have them. That'll be at the next meeting on the 15th of November. Also, you will find on your desks on the 15th I guess a survey, evaluation form. What are we looking at? As you know, we agreed back when we reorganized the county board committees that the first part of the year we will take a look at the evaluation, the assessment of the operations of the new committee structure. Teddy Winnett and her department, Extension Education, have agreed to take on that task. They met with the executive committee a couple of months back and are now putting together a survey to collect some data from all the county board members as well as staff, and I believe the youth and governance. The executive committee is not and will not see the evaluation form until it's presented to the full board. We did talk about what we wanted to see, some of the thoughts we had, and some of the information we'd like to have gathered. But it is not something that we'll have input on in terms of the questions that will be asked or the input that we're looking for. So that will be on your desk on the 15th. If you'd like it electronically, Supervisor Hallman and others, it will be emailed out, I believe, on the 16th. It'll be in the information that's left for us to take a look at. So I urge everyone to fill out that information, that evaluation, as quickly as you can once it is provided to us again on the 15th. Executive Committee, we have our budget adoption next week, Tuesday, which is typically the Executive Committee meeting evening, and we will not be meeting in November because of that. We'll push that meeting off until our regular meeting in December. That's all I have. Supervisor reports. Vice Chairman Eckerness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The redistricting trial began yesterday morning and went all day and started again this morning and went to 11:30. It is going very well from our perspective. The trial opened up with the judge denying summary judgment to the city yesterday morning and taking serious issue with a great many of their positions. And it finished up this morning with the judge denying a motion for directed verdict in their favor and taking serious issue with the reasons that they felt it should be granted to them. It will continue on Monday morning. We are scheduled to have the whole day with the judge. I am very impressed with the way the judge is handling this. He is doing a great deal of research and study on the issue and using that information to form the rulings that he has made. So far, I think we've prevailed in nearly every ruling that he has made. So we look forward to next Monday morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Boy, I'd like to see, I don't see any of their lights on the board here, but Supervisor Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, last week, Tuesday, October 25th, I had the privilege of going to the Kenosha County 4-H Awards Night that was put on by the UW Extension staff. Unfortunately, the members of the the Extension Committee could not attend. They had a meeting, so I was able to attend for them and give out several awards to the youth of Kenosha. It was quite the night. Ms. Wynette put on an excellent program for the youth, and I was very proud to be there, and they did an exemplary job. Second of all, I'd like to announce that I will not be seeking re-election. I've had the privilege of being on the Kenosha County Board for the last 8 years. I'd like to take a special thanks to the 4 supervisors that were the chairmen that I've had the privilege to work with. First of all, Supervisor Alverman, Supervisor Rose, Supervisor Clark, and of course Chairman Molinaro now. It's been a privilege to work with all of you. It's amazing looking at the budget books, looking at the numbers. I've had the privilege to spend over almost $1 billion for Kenosha, and I think it was $1 billion that was spent appropriately. Seeing the presentation by the firm that dealt with the Kenosha, our nursing home, Brookside, it's a gem, and it's good to see things like that in this community. I'd like to thank Corporation Counsel, Frank, for the excellent job you've done, being the chairman of the Judiciary and Law, working with you, and watching you in court with what's going on. I think the staff, it's been a great experience, and you'll see in the Kenosha News and other news. I sent out a press release. The reason why I'm not running for the county board is I'm going to be running for the Kenosha Circuit Court judge, and I think this was a great experience. I just want to thank everybody.
Well, I jokingly said I didn't see any other lights on the board because I'm certainly disappointed, Supervisor Michael, in the fact that you will not be seeking re-election to the county board. Again, it's a significant amount of experience that I believe this board will lose next term, recognizing there's no guarantees of re-election either way. I wish you well in your run for judge, and I'll remind you that I don't need any help if I run again, or when I run again, on the $1 billion that we've spent over the last couple of years. We may want to paint that just a little bit differently. Supervisor Clark.
Just want to update the calendar. We're going to have the first reading of the budget next Monday, and then we're going to actually have the budget adoption public hearing, I believe, on Tuesday. Bring your budget books Monday night. If you leave them here Monday night, the staff will insert the modifications that have been approved by the Finance Committee, so you have the latest information. It's a little bit different than prior years. We did it on Tuesday and Wednesday, but due to scheduling, it's going to be on Monday and Tuesday of next week. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other lights. Clerk.
New business, Resolution 64 from Judiciary and Law and Finance Administration Committee regarding 2011 budget to recognize surplus revenue to cover anticipated expenditures. Submitted by Judiciary and Law. Michael, yes. Haas, yes. Ronald Johnson, yes. Singer, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. Grulich excused. Zerban, yes. Finance Administrative Clark, yes. O'Day, yes. Jeff Gens, yes. Eckerness, yes. Rose, yes. Singer, yes. Grady, yes.
Supervisor Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move resolution number 64.
Resolution 64 moved by Michael, seconded by Clark. Supervisor Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As stated in this resolution, the sheriff anticipates closing the year with an unanticipated surplus in revenue from the federal inmates, but unfortunately there was several expenditures that exceeded the budget, and that was basically the inmate medical services, fuel, office supplies, and inmate pharmaceuticals. And basically, as shown within the resolution, we did request that the sheriff's request for the mobile command post, that unit be taken out. There'll be a separate resolution that will continue through finance and also through the Judiciary and Law to be debated. But I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Clark.
Those additional expenses primarily have to do with the additional revenue, and it's not that they're variable expenses. The more inmates we have, the more food costs you have, the more transport, the more medical. So it's not a reflection on the operation negatively. It's just the fact that we had more revenues, so you have to have costs that go along with them.
And I didn't get my packet. I recognize once in a while that it doesn't make it to a few of us in the mail promptly. No reflection on the clerk's office. It just is what it is. The question is, this comes up year after year, primarily related to housing of the federal inmates. That's all this is tied to, is expenses to operations based on inmate housing, correct? Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, this is a budget modification. P and plus if you're in favor, P and minus if you're opposed. How is that possible? Is that right? Motion carries 23 to nothing. Did we have 23 here before?
It was wrong.
It was wrong. Okay.
Approval of the October 18th, 2011 minutes by Supervisor Rose.
Supervisor Rose.
I would move the approval of the minutes.
Minutes moved by Rose, seconded by Supervisor Grady. Anyone on the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of the minutes signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Supervisor Clark, motion to adjourn. Seconded by Supervisor Michael. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you.